And we are live.
Oh, all right.
Welcome to the Take Note podcast with Keli Ananda. And we have a special guest, very special guest today, Rukmini Poddar.
Very special.
Very special.
Aw.
Thank you so much for being here with us.
You guys have very too many times.
Take note, our whole vision and mission is really to connect with the aesthetics that are inherent in the practice and the culture and the philosophy of Bhakti Yoga. And I would say kind of in a more specific manner, really connecting with our process as practitioners of spiritual life, that through the spiritual journey, how does that relate? And how does that move with our creative process as well? And what is the relationship between that? So we get wonderful creative persons to come on here and have deep, meaningful discussions. And here we are with Rukmini Poddar.
Rukmini,
I love that.
You do quite a lot of podcasts, don't you? Quite often you speak with people.
I do. I was actually going to say, I'm starting to get self-conscious that I'm like too much on the internet. Like I'm oversaturating people with my voice and my face. So I think I do, but I think I also need to tone it down.
Well, it's really wonderful because, I was thinking about this word cliche and people always say, I know it's a cliche, but, and then they go on to say what they don't. But the reason cliches are cliches is because they're super good, And so I think that's how I see you, and that's how you should see yourself as well. The reason you do lots of podcasts is because you're super good. And cliches are cliches because they make sense. They're good. They're practical and they serve a purpose.
They've captured an essence of a thing that we're all looking for and experiencing.
And that's actually a perfect statement, I think, to describe you, Rukmini.
Yeah.
An essence seeker. I once made a drawing on that.
You've captured the essence of our experience and what it is we're looking for. I think that's what has attracted me to your work. That's what has attracted me to you just as a person. And I think that's, the people that you're supporting in so many different ways. I have a hunch that that's what is attracting all of them to you.
Thank you.
I like how we don't plan this, but Take Note usually just starts with just attacking the guest with kind and charm.
Yeah. I know, I'm feeling it. I actually don't know how to respond.
Well, it's not some plan, but I guess we just kind of communicate telepathically, let's just melt their heart and then just ask.
Then take out all the ghee that's been melted.
Well, you both are very sweet, and I already know that there's like a bro fest happening there. So I think the love just naturally kind of pours out onto others. So
there's a surplus. There is a surplus.
Yeah, there's a surplus. That's
sure. So I was trying to kind of write a bio for you just to share with people, and I couldn't, so instead I just went on your website and just kind of got some inspiration from there. But is it okay if we share just a little bit of information about you, Rukmini, so people that don't know you will be able to know you? So
yeah,
Rukmini Poddar, is that right?
Poddar is what I like to say.
Okay. So Rukmini is an incredible artist, a designer, an illustrator, and are you from Florida originally, Rukmini?
Yeah. I think my website still says I live in New York, but in fact I do not. It's taken me a long time to accept that fact, though. About a year.
How long were you in New York?
I would say 4 years in total. In the beginning, it was a little back and forth, but from 2016 to 2020, so maybe 3.5 years.
Okay. Awesome. Well, Rukmini does so much. Currently, I guess you're best known for what you share online, especially on Instagram. And I guess one thing I know you for is how you really pioneer and spearhead this 100-day project. And either if you haven't known about the 100-day project and you come to know of Rukmini, you'll definitely find out about it. But within that as well, just within under the umbrella of this 100-day project, there is such depth and such research and just like so much that you share, which is why I thought it was apt to name this podcast Prolific versus Perfect.
I love that.
I think it's an excellent name, and I'm really,
it is very
really
much
proud. I remember when I was living in the ashram as a monk, we were talking about pride, and pride is one of those things where like it's easy to be proud about anything. Like even like the way you open a door. I remember one of the monks was like, "Did you see the way I opened that door?" Like, you know. Pride is a funny thing, but anyway. But I think it is a good title, because being prolific and being perfect are two almost like, I feel like they're contradictory in some way, but they can be reconciled in an incredible way. But both terms cause dissonance for me on a daily basis, and no better person than you, I think, could perhaps reconcile these things and give some insight into them.
When I think of prolific versus perfection, I always think of quantity over quality. And of course, we are always driven towards perfection and quality. And of course, there's so much value to it. But my personal motto, especially over the last few years, has been quantity over quality. And it always kind of spins people's heads. They're like, I've never heard anyone kind of go for that. And I mean, how do you even get to quality unless you do quantity first? So I just find that there's so much to be discovered when we allow ourselves to do the work and not chase after perfection, because it will just come by showing up consistently and as much as possible.
I had the same type of reaction. I read that on your website, that quantity over quality, and I was like, oh, that's not normally the paradigm that I I function under. You know, I normally think of that term in reference to like friendships, right? Or I think of that term in reference to I guess relationships. That's where I kind of often like think of that term. And I've seen, you know, my tendency is I can be very outgoing, and the tendency to kind of just have too much emphasis on the quantity of my relationships rather than the quality of my relationships really doesn't inspire me. So that's kind of, that's how I normally view that phrase, or kind of when we use that idea, that's how I normally think of it. But it was a very interesting, and I'm excited about this conversation, diving into it, because in regards to our in regards to our efforts, specifically like creative efforts, but I feel like it can apply to any type of endeavor, right? Quantity over quality.
Yeah, definitely. And like you said, with relationships and friendships, I mean, quality is so important. That's what we're going for. But the quantity, coming to a creative sense of creating in quantity, I love that, because I feel like it invokes some sense of like surrendering the results, which is so much of what we talk about in Bhakti. But when you're doing a quantity over quality, you're just creating. You're just in the studio, you're pumping out songs, you're creating drawings, you're creating quantity, because that's kind of all you can do. You can't control the quality. You can hope for it, and you can hope that it'll come as you produce more quantity. I'm getting the words mixed up, but as you create more, you're hoping it becomes quality work. But I love that, because it just reminds me that as an artist, that's what we have control over in one sense. It's just the showing up and the creating day after day. So that's always been exciting for me.
Rukmini, are you aware of this 10,000 hour rule?
Yeah. The idea that you become a master at something after 10,000 hours.
Yeah. So this is what I guess probably many people know about this, but this is what it is said usually. You can spend 10,000 hours doing anything, and usually after this very specific amount of time, you will master the trade. There's a quote that I quite like about like, failure, and how, I can't remember who said it, but it's like, you haven't failed. You've just found 10,000 ways that won't work,
Yeah.
And so I think like that would be a really interesting place to start, is, it seems like in the pursuit of perfection, in order to even reach any hope of perfection, you have to fail to some degree. And
sorry, I didn't mean
I got distracted.
I didn't mean to. I should wait next time, but
no, it's cool.
This was just a nice comment. She was responding to where this quote comes from. David Maxfield.
Okay, nice.
Influencers.
Nice, yeah. So it seems like, yeah, like you're saying, they're actually linked. You know, they're not opposites. Like, in order to reach perfection, you need to be prolific. You need to do a lot. But it seems like the idea of failing is far more prevalent and apparent in being prolific, whereas, you know, being like perfect is the absence of failure. But there is something actually attractive about, yeah, the perhaps the lack or the, you know, the imperfections of being prolific. But, you know, maybe those imperfections are made up in quantity. But I'm not sure, like, that I'd love you to elaborate on this kind of feeling of like being okay with being prolific, even though you're going to fail and fail and fail and fail and fail.
Yeah.
How do you like stay?
Totally. I mean, you know, and I have so much perfectionism tendencies in myself too. It's not like I'm just this prolific artist and I just create tons. It's always like a dance, and it's a relationship with our own creativity. But that's why I just love the 100-Day Project, and I become this like ridiculous enthusiast for it each year. I mean, literally each year I tell myself, like, I don't know if I want to do it. It's not like I'm pre-prepared and I'm sold and I'm committed. Every year I'm wondering, and then every year I'm like, yes, as if it's like the first time I'm doing it. And every year I'm like bringing people along with me. And of course, I didn't make up this project. It's existed for so long, and thousands of people do it. But for me, I have a love for this project because it's kind of what started me on a creative process that just felt a lot more, I don't know, like self-revelatory, if that makes sense. Like I learned about myself in the process because I've always been creative. I went to school and I went to art school and I became a graphic designer. And so that's been a big part of who I am. But it wasn't until I graduated from graphic design school and I felt a little bit burnt out and I didn't want to see a computer. And I also didn't know what I was doing with my life, whether I wanted to get a job or what I wanted to do. And then this 100-Day Project came along and I said, okay, perfect. This is a great excuse to just pull out my paints in my sketchbook again and just do a little doodle and to like not have an expectation of what it should be. So first of all, that itself is freeing because a 100-Day Project, it forces you to be prolific and it forces you to like let go of your expectations of what it should be. And you kind of see it takes on a life of its own. So when anyone is ever struggling with perfectionism and what should I do? And I feel so creatively blocked, like my answer is the same every time. It's do a 100-Day Project. And some people do it and they'll struggle with it. And then they'll come to me being like, oh, it's only day 30 and I failed, you know, I'm so behind. And I'm like, you did 30 things. That is amazing. Like, why do we see it from this way of failing? And just because like we have this result, we want to get to those 100 days. And if we can't get it perfectly and in this way that we imagined, it's therefore a failure. And I just think that's crazy that we all have this idea that if we don't have this journey and we don't go about it exactly the way we imagined and the way it should look like, it's therefore a failure. For me, it's like, well, you're just learning about yourself. You're just literally gaining data. Every failure is a new data point of, oh, I did this, that didn't work in this way. Let me try this. Like you said, you can either see it as failing or 10,000 ways something doesn't work. And so again, it just says so much about who we are and who our culture is that we can't tolerate the sense of uncertainty and the sense of not knowing and the sense of going out to do something and it turns out different. But I think that lack of just like flexibility is going to really be a big challenge for us because we're not going to allow what's meant to be expressed to just take on a life of itself, if that makes sense. So in my own journey with the 100-Day Project, I always start somewhere and I end up totally different. But that like dance with creative uncertainty, that dance with allowing something to just be messy because it might be leading you somewhere. It's almost like your creativity is like, you almost have to see it as a different being. And it's just you're creating something, but you're kind of following it. It's not that you're telling it where to go. I mean, when you talk about creativity like this, it can sound a little mystical, but no, I think, yeah,
it's awesome. I like talking of the mystery of it. There, like from my experience and specifically my experience of your work, there's like these nuances with being prolific, and the two main ones I can kind of identify as like form and substance. By that I mean, you know, like how art or how anything we convey is like a vehicle for intention, whether it's a song or a piece of art, it's a vehicle for intention. But we often we focus on the form of the
Oh,
thing.
I love that. Yeah.
And like, this is something I'm going through with, especially like with music, trying to release music professionally. You know, it's like you can get so focused on, like, you know, if everything's produced perfectly and everything sounds clean and wonderful, and sometimes you can tweak things in such a way where you lose some of the substance, although the form is the form is and substance is gone, you know. So have you found that, like, in your pursuit for perfection, some of the substance has gone, and maybe that can be, you know, combated with, like, forcing yourself to be prolific? I don't know.
Yeah, a lot comes to mind, this form over substance, because when I started my little sketches, I mean, the form was very crude, full of imperfections. They were just literally these pink watercolor figures you might have seen from my first series on obscure emotions. Like, I literally carried a sketchbook that would fit in my purse just because it was portable. I would do it in the parking lot, on subway stations, and I just used one color because it was easy. And so that was, again, very crude form. And yet the substance, when I look at that, I'm like, how did I create that? Because there was something so honest in me that was just being translated day after day as I was, like, excavating my own emotions and sharing it. And what's so interesting is when I look at that series, I don't know if I could do it again with the same impact, because there's something about creating art that's honest. Like, when you're living something and you're feeling it doesn't matter if you know how to draw or make music, but like that's the substance, is that self-honesty. And that comes across, and it's like a revelation for you. It's a revelation for other people who make it. And for me, that's actually humbling, because you again feel the sense of, like, it's just coming through me somehow. And as someone who's like an artist or the channel, I don't even know how to make a proper figure. I don't even know anything about painting. And still, something about that work is really touching the hearts of other people and myself. So that's like an example of, like, I was just churning stuff out, and I was so inspired that substance could come out of me, even if the form was crude. Now, what's interesting is that it's not always like that. It changes. And then year after year, I got a little bit better in my form, and I got more thoughtful in how I present things. I also got a larger following, and that also changes how you present yourself and, like, your standard for perfection. And so as my following went up, I wanted to keep creating art that was better and better. But at times, sometimes I wondered if I did lose a little bit of my substance. And again, why the intention, why you're creating. You know, when I first started creating, I didn't care about the audience. I had no following. I was just making it for myself, and that self-honesty touches people. But as I started creating for others, and I had 10,000 followers, 20,000, 30, you know, it's exciting, but it feels like, oh, this is more popular on Instagram, or, oh, my audience likes this better. And although you want to engage with your audience, that's the part where, you know, even success can kind of trickle and dilute your substance a little bit. And I think all artists feel this in some way, that dance with your own success, and that dance with keeping the integrity of your art really solid. So I think it's an ongoing thing. Sometimes I feel like my substance, like, where did it go? I don't even know how to create work like I did use it before, and sometimes it comes. So yeah, that's an interesting thing.
I as you're saying that, I'm relating a lot, because just in my own, I've done one previous 100-day project, and it took me more than 100 days. But it was really wonderful doing it. It was like a haiku project that I did.
I remember that.
And it was blissful. And I'm still in the process of I'm wanting to kind of organize all of those haikus into a book also, because it's 100 things that I did. Like you said, it's just like already so much was created from that. This year, seeing myself attempt again the 100-day project, and just kind of in my own experience of, I think I'm on like day 37, and I'm feeling very stuck. And I hearing that, and kind of relating to the statement you made about what is the motivation for why we're creating something, and especially when it comes to the creative process. And I was thinking about another hesitation that comes up for me with this idea of quantity over quality. And, you know, it's actually slipping my mind. So let's, I wanted to come back because it was an important point, but it's gone now.
Well, you were talking about your experience with the 100-day project, being stuck. Was it something to do with wanting to have a certain quality that you're churning out for people? And was that kind of what was getting you stuck? Or?
Yeah,
Totally
I
not.
think it's the idea of, yeah, what is the purpose of what I'm, okay, it came back. So the whole kind of environment, you mentioned social media, you mentioned Instagram, like this whole idea of the, you know, Keli and I often joke about like the algorithm and like fighting upstream against this algorithm that kind of, you know, lifts certain things up and puts certain things down. You know, I'll post certain things on Instagram and it's like, I feel like 200 people saw it. Then I'll post some things on Instagram, which I cared a lot about, and it's like 10 people saw it.
Yeah.
You know, so it's this
sad.
interesting thing, you know, and then kind of in seeing in my own relationship with creativity and specifically social media, the idea that like the algorithm favors quantity, right? So then I'm like, I feel resistant to the quantity, right? That was another thing that was coming up for me, my resistance to just kind of the quantity that is almost demanded of us in the environment of kind of the instantaneous nature of social media. You know, you can be left behind if you don't produce so much.
Totally.
Right. So do you have any thoughts kind of on that, and how have you kind of felt around that with your own creativity?
Yeah, well, I have a lot of mixed feelings about social media for sure. And is my internet okay? Or maybe I just wanted to make sure I wasn't getting cut off.
You're fine. Maybe I'm getting cut off.
Okay, both of you are fine right now.
Okay.
But on the topic of social media, I have so many mixed feelings about it. I mean, in some ways, I've been totally benefited from it. So I would be a hypocrite if I would just say like, yeah, throw it all away. But at the same time, it's such a like artificial environment. And like you said, I feel like social media should be a tool that we use as artists to kind of amplify our own voices and creations. But I consistently feel like we're the tools being used by social media. You know, like it's demanding for us to create a certain way and to create quantity and to do all kinds of things. And it's really tiring. And I'm very much not about that. You know, if you asked me 5 years ago, what do you think about social media and creativity? I would be like, you know, it's a tool and you can use it. And I found that it can really bring people together and build community. But if you asked me that today, I would think differently. I think just in the last 5 years, it's changed a lot. And so because of that, I also feel like I'm swimming upstream. And sometimes I feel like I intentionally want to go against whatever, you know, the algorithm tells us we should do. It's like, nope, I'm going to, you know, do whatever I want to do or post the same image a bunch of times or whatever the case is. So I, you know, it just comes back down to like, what's your motivation again?
Yeah.
And using a platform like social media is just tricky because it's meant to be a platform where it's self-promotion and where we're building following. So then, of course, we're always broadcasting our thoughts. It's not really a place to share private thoughts and to just be neutral about who sees them. So yeah, I wonder, you know, if you were to do a project outside of social media, if it would feel different, if I would feel different about it. But that's all I can say at the moment.
Yeah.
I feel the struggle.
This term you used, Rukmini, excavating your emotions. That's genius. That's a genius phrase, by the way. And it seems like this is perhaps something that is, how would you say, that is sacrificed in the pursuit of quantity. Like you were saying, we broadcast our feelings, we broadcast our thoughts, and we feel pressure to do that sometimes. And actually, activity like excavating one's emotions, that's like quite a you know, like a fragile state of being. That like you know, if I was thinking about, okay, I'm just gonna spend this weekend excavating my emotions, I wouldn't like go live on Instagram for the weekend. You know, I wouldn't want to broadcast it. It's quite vulnerable. It's quite fragile. But it's essential for creativity. It's, you know, we have to dive deep. We have to excavate. We have to like actually look and you know, find inspiration to create. You know. One thing I really want to kind of get your insight in as well, Rukmini, is the Enneagram and how, like, I'm lamenting because I've had so many opportunities to delve into this, and every time it comes up for me, it seems so relevant. I just haven't like taken the dive that I needed to take. So, well, first, perhaps you could inspire and anyone watching to like start getting a bit clued up about Enneagram. But also like in relation to excavating one's emotions and then perhaps like, you know, choosing selectively what you do broadcast and what you don't broadcast. How does that affect proliferation and perfectionism? And how can we perhaps begin to see through these lenses of something like an Enneagram?
Yeah. Well, if you want to excavate your emotions, the Enneagram is the perfect tool. And Mari knows this. We're actually in the same workshop together.
Yeah,
and
I think
literally
that's when
it was
I first met you.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's literally called excavating your ego. So maybe I stole that phrasing from them, which I think is perfect because I know, what can I say? All artists are thieves to some degree. But yeah, the Enneagram is the perfect explanation for understanding our ego, for excavating what's deeper in us. If you look at my work, I do a lot with it. Right now, I'm doing a little series on the Enneagram I really enjoy. And I think back in 2018, that's kind of how I got a large following. Initially, like my first bump of people who followed me was when I started doing a 100-day project just on the different Enneagram types and how they can be expressed. And I soon discovered there was like a hungry fan base of people like undercover that I never knew that existed, and somehow they tapped into my work. So that was exciting. But in a nutshell, I mean, the Enneagram is like, there are many personality typing tools out there. I'm sure you're familiar with Myers-Briggs and DISC and things like that. But I have just been consistently blown away by the power of the Enneagram, and I still am. It's been a few years since I first introduced to it, precisely because the Enneagram talks about human motivation rather than human behavior. So that's what's so fascinating, because we see each other's behavior, and it's a little bit easier to like type a person based on how they behave. But the type of person based on their motivation is so subtle and so nuanced and incredibly complicated, and yet there's still a framework. So the Enneagram is basically your blueprint. Like if you wanted a blueprint to how your mind works and the minds of others, it actually exists. And it's no simple thing. A lot of people want to just take a test and figure out their type, and it might bring you close, but it really does take like years of just reading and learning about it and discussions and like living the Enneagram framework. And it's been around for so long. It's popular in different religious communities. I think it first came up in the monastery, I don't know, like even hundreds of years ago. So there's like a rich, complex history. But all that to say that I believe I was really drawn to the Enneagram precisely because I love this kind of inner excavation, this whole idea of emotions. I think I was naturally drawn to it. If any of you know Rasanath from New York, him and his business partner Hari Prasad, they really founded their business based off the Enneagram. That's what they have been doing for the last decade. I remember it was like 4 years ago, and I had my little book of emotions at the time, and I think I gave Rasanath and his wife a copy, and he kind of looked at me and he said, "Oh, you're drawing Enneagram types without even knowing it." I was like, well, I was so intrigued. What does that mean? And so he was kind of saying Enneagram types, like these personalities, you kind of already have an intuitive knowing of them, but imagine if you knew them deeper. And so I just like was so attracted to it. And so it really made alive what I felt like I was intuitively feeling about people and how I was drawing these emotions and very attracted to that. But instead of it being intuitive, it felt much more like a science, like a framework. Also discovering my type was really interesting too. And it just teaches you more of like why you do the things that you do. What are you afraid of? What do you really want? What does your ego really desire? And anyway, all that to say that it's very helpful, especially as an artist or anyone, to just to find your integrity a little bit more. Because I think, as you both feel, and many artists and creators, there's always this push and pull between like authenticity and, I don't know, like promotion or putting yourself out there. And sometimes it feels like they're conflicted, like two opposites, when I do think they can be integrated. But it does feel like there's this opposite push and pull, like the person who just wants to make the art that's truly full of substance and that's so attractive and, that's so real and honest. And then there's the other part that wants to like be really successful and be really well known by people. And, the ego wants to be drenched in fame and knowing, and, you can't deny it. That's for sure there. And so there is that very interesting inner tension. So all that to say that a framework like the Enneagram helps to identify it, helps to know it, helps to see it in yourself and others.
I remember when I first came to know of the Enneagram, I was actually staying with Rasanath in Vrindavani. And I had met them like the previous winter in India, and we connected. We were on a bus trip on the way to Mayapur, and we were in the back of the bus, like rocking, and it was just a horrendous like a place to have a conversation, but the conversation was so meaningful, and we connected very, very closely on that little trip. And they invited me to come stay with them, so I was staying with them in New York City, and I remember they just started asking me questions about, oh, do you feel like this ever? And do you ever do this? Or
they're diagnosing you.
Yeah. And I was like, how do you know?
Oh, man.
I never told anyone any of these things, like any of these motivations, these fears, or, and we just met, and just the insight that they had because of the framework. And I think for me, the cool thing was, and you kind of spoke to this when you talked about like the science of it. It was very, very inspiring to see that, wow, the mentality that I've kind of getting, it's like, I oftentimes akin it to like a car. Like a car has certain characteristics and specifications and features, right? So in the same way, these human bodies have certain qualities and special features, and a certain type of autopilot and whatever. There's a certain type of design. And I think it gave me a lot of it was just very insightful, like, wow, there's the kind of vehicle that I'm inhabiting. It gives clarity around, oh, that this is a vehicle. This physical form is like a vehicle.
There's actually a lot of talk about identity these days, whether it's race, gender, sexual preference, whatever it is. Identity is a huge thing. And I saw just something today. Someone was commenting about privilege. We hear this word, like white privilege or whatever privilege. And, this person was commenting like, privilege isn't like what you have. Say, people think someone that has privilege has an abundance of wealth or wisdom or whatever it is. But they were saying that's not privilege. Privilege is actually the like the obstacles that don't exist in your life, the opportunities that that you have that other people don't have, which is actually a lot more subtle than looking at someone's bank balance or looking at where someone lives or whatever. It's like what opportunities perhaps present themselves to this person due to their identity. And it seems like something similar can be seen for you were talking about, instead of looking at people's behavior, looking at their motivation. It's more hidden. It's more
it's a great
subtle.
example.
It's more subtle. But actually, it's like the iceberg, right? We just see the tip of the iceberg, but the body of the iceberg is underneath the water. And so people often say, like, to make real change, you don't want to move the iceberg from the top, right? It will be a lot harder to move the whole iceberg from the top. You want to really go deep, and like, that's how you shift the iceberg. So it seems something like the Enneagram is something that does allow you to dive deeper than, instead of just seeing someone's behavioral traits, you see their motivation. And that must be really healthy for art. And it seems like that is something, that can be unlocked if you want to become prolific in what you do. It seems like the two go very well together. Would you agree? Or?
Yeah, I was going to say, for someone who doesn't know the Enneagram, that was like that was very well said. That was a great analogy. I think it helps us to go deep to actually our deepest motivation of why we're doing what we're doing, what is driving us. And like you said, it's the hidden stuff. It's all this like subconscious things that we don't even know. And if only we could realize that we're being driven by all these motivations that we aren't aware of, what would it be like to shift that? I don't remember your question.
Well, I'm just thinking, because you were saying, like, when we talk about creativity like this, it's kind of mystical, and that can maybe that's not so attractive for a lot of people. But actually, something like the Enneagram is like giving a science to the mystery almost. So in specifically focusing on being prolific, it seems like diving deep can unlock this potential to just be prolific.
Yeah. And when I think of being prolific, though, I also think it can be so much simpler than what we think. Even earlier when you said, to excavate our emotions, it seems really difficult. Like, how are you supposed to do that again and again? And I also feel like being prolific is actually it's it's actually like a bit of an ego bash, because the ego wants, at least my ego wants to be super deep and really profound, and everything I do goes there. And it's like, nope, it's just sitting down and doing something that day, and then doing it again, and then doing it again. So when I just to think that it can also be that simple, that just that consistency of like showing up, and literally you almost have, it kind of bashes your ego a little bit, because the ego wants to do something really meaningful each day, especially the 4, the Enneagram 4 with the 3 wing. It's all about wanting to be deep and authentic and also be successful at the same time. But I think being really prolific at what you do is really good for the ego, in the sense that you're kind of just letting that go, that expectation. You're just like, you know what? I'm almost not taking myself so seriously today. I'm almost just showing up as best as I can. I'm just kind of doing it because I said I would do it. And I'm not getting caught up in my thoughts or in my feelings. And sometimes those days where I feel a little bit more just, free from my own burdened expectations, I just draw something and then I say, wow, where did that come from? And I feel like that is like the real place, because then you feel this humility of like, that wasn't even me. Where did that come from? Rather than like, I'm creating this amazing thing and I'm going to do it day after day. And as an artist, I think you can feel really burdened by that after a while, to always have that expectation to create something so deep and meaningful all the time. But we can't. And I think the prolification comes when you feel like, I just show up. The creativity is the genius that will somehow show its way. And if it doesn't show it today, it's okay. I did my job. I showed up. Tomorrow I'll show up again. Let's see what happens. And again, I don't operate at this all the time, but those little glimpses, when I do, it feels like, oh, I get it. This is sustainable. Otherwise, this other way of working is not sustainable. But this is to just show up like it's your job. And especially the artist does not want to have a consistent job where you show up every day and you just create. But somehow that humility of just saying, this is what I'm doing, it's super simple, is all it takes.
I really like this point of kind of the conception we can have around excavating our emotions. Actually, when I first heard you use the phrase, I thought about like an excavation site, like an archaeological site. It would be very delicate, like brush around the old clay pots or whatever that's buried in the ground so you don't break anything. But I think also that, oftentimes our emotions, when we have stuck emotions, or in other words, when our emotions have been buried by conceptions or kind of by behaviors or how we think we should be in the world, right? We're actually taking more energy keeping those things buried, keeping those things underneath the surface. And I think of it sometimes as like, if you have a house and then you have tenants that just live there that don't pay rent, and you end up picking up after them. You end up doing their dishes, you end up doing their laundry, and they don't pay rent, and you're too scared to, ask them to pay rent or to kick them out. Right. So, in the same way, our emotions, if, I have these emotions that have made their residence in my heart, but I haven't created a contract with them. I haven't recognized them, acknowledged them, that they live here. They're just living rent free. And then I'm having to pick up the mess. I'm having to pick up the mess of, when I snap or when I get really depressed or whatever happens, because I haven't acknowledged, made a contract, connected really with the emotions that are living in my heart.
That's such a great analogy. Yeah. The unacknowledged emotions. Not even that you have to just kick them out immediately, but at least like recognizing them is.
Yeah. Like, hey, you live here, I live here. Let's work together.
Let's make it peaceful for sure. And I mean, and that's why I coined the phrase obscure emotion, because how many kinds of emotions out there that are so like, what's the word? Ambiguous, like all kinds of, like someone introduced me to the phrase ambiguous loss, which I've been researching, and it's fully, there's a whole psychology behind that. But how much ambiguous loss do we live with, or ambiguous grief, or I mean, there's just so much, and I'm I'm really not an expert at this, and there's so much that I have to, so I guess, excavate. But I guess coming to the point that it can just be that simple. And that's why practices like even journaling every day, or how people do the morning pages and things like that, people almost don't want to believe it's just that simple as a way to begin that healing, that dialogue, but it can be.
And one other thing that just came up too is that even by that showing up, I also appreciate this point of humility that you're bringing out, that by showing up and just kind of, rather than thinking I'm going to have to control the situation and control the scenario, which takes so much energy, to control. You mentioned the morning pages, and I was doing that for a few weeks, and I want to go back through that process, this book, The Artist's Way.
Yeah,
right?
me too.
Because I could tell what a beautiful process it was, and I wasn't in the space where I was like willing to just commit to it. So I want to come back to it, but yeah, that mode of surrender. And I think it's Ernest Hemingway. They said, how do you become a good writer? And he says, well, you just sit in front of the pages and bleed. Right?
Oh, wow.
Which is intense. It's an intense statement.
Yeah.
But in many ways, bleeding is a passive process. It's something that's coming from you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And whatever's already there, it's like allowing it to come out.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense. I don't want to do tangent so much, but
no, I love that.
It's interesting thinking about like going back to the thought of cliches as well. And yeah, it's really interesting how you can almost you hear these things like talking about emotions. People say, because we are not shy to share bhakti and art, share our spiritual life and our art simultaneously. And we hear things in spiritual dialogue and literature like cliches. Emotions are visitors, you should let them come and go, things like this. We hear these things in meditation language, to be equipoised in happiness and distress. And this is very much like the yogi lifestyle. The spiritual lifestyle is to be situated in the self, the deepest part of yourself, and not allow yourself to be swayed actually by happiness and distress or these emotions. But it does seem like a very how would you say it seems like a very confident move to actually address these things, and these emotions, and not just shun them,
Yeah, it's sorry, I was just thinking that I feel like I never had that mindset when I started drawing or going about this process. I didn't feel like I'm this really confident, emotionally aware, I'm going to really do the self-work. I don't know, maybe some people start like that, but for me, it's like, I just feel a little bit like a mess, and I'm going to just draw how I feel every day for 100 days. And so I share that because, one, I want to be more approachable. I don't want it to be like I'm this like conduit of my emotion. It's just like sometimes the most amazing things of substance come from just being in an honest place. Yeah. And it wasn't like my life was falling apart or anything, but it just came from just wanting to be a little bit more curious about what I was feeling. So, and yeah, I just wanted to throw that in again to come to that point of simplicity of like, just kind of like, what are you curious about right now in your life, and do it.
I mean, that's exactly what I wanted you to say, really, because like this is something I feel. It's like, okay, I wake up today, I've got to do something deep, and I'm sitting there like, with some piece of paper in front of me, or a piano or a guitar or something, like, okay, waiting for something deep. And actually it's like, I'm just tired. Like, I just feel tired today. Like, and it's almost like, no, that's ridiculous. You can't just be tired. Surely you have some complex, meaningful emotion.
I love that.
It's like, no, actually, you are just tired and hungry.
That's it.
And there is something liberating about being able to admit to yourself, that you are a complex being, in a complex universe with complex relationships and many wonderfully elaborate and diverse, saturated things to share and say and communicate. But sometimes it's also good for proliferation or perfectionism to just be honest and be like, I'm just in a bad mood. I'm just tired. I'm just hungry. And, and actually good art can come from that as well. And it's not necessarily shallow, right? I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. But...
It's honest. It's just kind of being real too. And I just made me think of the Enneagram type 4s, because this is such a 4 conversation talking about trying
all
not
of
to
us
be so
just
deep.
we can
I wonder if other people can relate with this, or it's just us that really
like this
go
poor
there.
universe going on right now.
If there's anything the Enneagram has taught me, it's that other people do not think like me all the time, and thank God. But it is fun kind of vibing with 4s and our very unique problems of like, oh God, am I just hungry, or am I having an existential identity crisis? So it's helpful to know, like, oh God, my ego just really wants to have an existential identity crisis, because that makes me a little bit more special, gives me good fodder for my art. Anyway, this is where the Enneagram is helpful to call myself out of like, just stop, just be a normal person, Rukmini. Stop being so profound all the time. You're not. But I guess all that to say that, yes, being prolific is just kind of being honest, and that's where the humility comes in, because we want that really, like juicy art, that really deep stuff, and it just comes back to just being where you're at, who you are, and creating what you have, and being in that moment to moment practice.
Authentic is most attractive.
Yeah, and authenticity is just honesty too.
Well, talking about creating, I actually have some of your creations right here. I have your obscure emotions.
I was looking for the book earlier. That's why I kind of
I was
dipped off
wondering.
camera. Yeah, I thought I had it on my bookshelf.
So I wanted to show this. Like I don't necessarily maybe we won't go through everything, but one thing I really do like to share, and I think it's inspiring for other people to see, is like to hold something like this. The fact that you are where are you now, in Florida? Or?
In Florida, yeah, in Alachua.
So it's so incredible how an artist like yourself can pour their heart out into some incredible art, and then this is like the other side of it, like to actually produce something like this and consider how to package it and how to ship it and how much it costs and how much money you're going to make, and all of these things. Like, yeah, there is perhaps a fear in people that artists can't be both creative and
practical, or make money.
Exactly. And so anyway, I wanted to show this off, because you've written a book as well, and in cards. In terms of what you've actually produced and created physically that people can get their hands on, could you share with us?
Well, thank you for sharing that. And it does bring to mind that, yes, there is this whole creative process, which could be so, in some ways, philosophical and spiritual. And then there is the practical part of it, which isn't any less important. And sometimes we just, gravitate to one or the other. Some people just love the production and want to make stuff and sell stuff and have that. And some people love the creative part, but do not want to put themselves out there. And I do think it's possible to do both. And for me, I always felt like it was very diverse. It's like one or the other. Which one am I? But I've been learning how to do both, and it's been really fulfilling. So for me, I'm kind of in a place now where I'm, after years of creating art and feeling like it was a little bit more than a hobby, but it was something I was kind of churning out for years. I'm stepping into making it actually a business, and how can I make this like financially stable for me, and what can I create for it, from it. So that's both exciting and kind of terrifying, because on one hand, of course, the authentic artist feels like immediately you're kind of selling out when you make something like a product and you're promoting yourself, which is nonsense. It's totally natural to do that. And then also just the idea of artists are not practical, even though I do believe now I'm a practical person, but we just have that ingrained. So somehow just by being an artist, we feel like incapable of like, managing our finances or like doing math or anything practical. So anyway, it's nice to kind of peel away those like preconceived notions and to actually create art that does get packaged and showed off to people and things like that.
This like I want to actually share some of these cards like closely, and I'm just thinking that these cards actually are really kind of a perfect example of being prolific and perfect, because just like the cards alone, like the texture of them is like really nice, and the way it's like come in this box and it's got a book kind of explaining things, and like the way it's presented is there is definitely a level of like perfectionism, but the amount of art here as well, this is just one deck of two. how incredible all of this is. And there is substance, there is form, there is like so much insight. It's been so nice to just sit down and like, I don't think I've done perhaps what you intended people to do with them, but I have just sat down and just kind of looked through them and definitely done some unintentional, like emotional excavation.
Oh, that makes me really happy. What you're seeing is my graphic design self and my illustrator self come together nicely, which is.
Let me just show some more, and maybe you can explain as I'm going through these, like just a bit more of the process, like compiling all of this art and working out how to make them into cards and like making your prolific project perfect,
Definitely. Well, a lot of these were drawn back in 2016 in my first series, and a lot of it is what was in my book when I created it. A few new ones are in there. I actually had this project, this whole idea of the cards sitting in my head for years because I just didn't have the time or the energy to make it into cards. But ever since I even put the art out there in the world, a lot of therapists especially and coaches came to me saying, if these were cards, I would use it with my clients. You could do so much with it. So first of all, this is actually an example of me throwing myself into something and having no idea how to use it, or even, I mean, there are mistakes in it. There's like several typos and there's, I could have, probably given better instructions on how to use it. So either I can kind of beat myself up now and be like, oh, I could have done it better, or my personal motto is better done than perfect. So although I like the quality, there's quality here, it's not perfect. I see that there's mistakes and it could be better, but I just wanted to finally put it out in the world. And so last year when I was home all year during COVID, I said, okay, I'm making this project come alive. It's going to happen. And so what I did is, well, especially being a graphic designer, it's actually not so hard for me to put it together. I have the technical skills. I just created an InDesign file of the right format. I kind of put in all the images, or if they didn't fit the format, I would redraw it or use my iPad and do some digital art on top of it to like make it look natural and nice. And then I have a printer I work with overseas. I sent him dimensions. I created like the box design and branded it, which was really fun. I created a second deck. So there's 50 decks of illustration and 50 prompts, which kind of worked my creative writing muscles a little bit. And just gave options for people how they want to use these cards. So anyway, it was fun putting it together. Marketing it was another thing too. I sent it to a friend of mine who's a photographer. I had her take photos. I put it on my website. I figured out shipping. That was a whole thing. So there were just so many things I was figuring it out as I was going. And that was both, scary, but empowering to just be like, I don't know how to do this. I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to make a lot of mistakes, ahead of time. I might lose money with this thing. I printed a bunch of boxes that were blank and I was so dumb. I was like, why are people going to buy this with a blank box? So then I reordered new boxes. I had them shipped over. I paid several $100s for that. And I just kind of saw like, yeah, the box, which I really like now, but everything is a learning process. Thank you. Definitely a background in graphic design does help because my desire for branding and all typography, that all comes alive. So it's satisfying to brand my own products.
I mean, that's a really interesting point I'd like to ask as well before we finish about, like, people do feel this pressure to do everything, to be an everything person. Like, if you're a musician, it's like, okay, you need to be able to play every instrument. You need to be able to engineer, record, mix, master, produce, promote, distribute, right? And, perhaps with art as well, it's like, there might be people out there that just like doing watercolor drawings, and that's all they know. And they don't have a background in graphic design or marketing or, any of these things. So although it's like, it's incredible that you can do all of these things, do you, how do you have any advice to people who maybe feel the pressure to like, oh, I just want to do watercolor, but I feel like I have to be on social media every day promoting myself, and I have to create these wonderful things and sell them and make money and learn how to use, Procreate or whatever it is. Like, is there any
it's such a good point. To be honest, I don't know if I have any specific feedback because the way of the world is that, yes, you have to do all those things. And is that unfair? It's super unfair. And am I privileged by having this background and having contacts overseas that I can print things? And yeah, I'm super privileged, and that's why I can do it. So I just want to point that out, that it is kind of unfair. Not kind of, it's super unfair that you have to be so equipped in so many different ways. I mean, how many video classes are there online where you have to learn video editing, and now everyone has to be a social media guru, and it's just so exhausting. And so I do feel that I'm equipped, that I can do it more, and that's been really helpful for me. But I do feel bad because I know that's a privilege that so many people don't have. And so I want to tell you, just follow your passion and just do what, lights up your soul, and don't care about the other things. But it's hard if you want to make money really out of your art, because then you have to suddenly do so many. And I don't know if I have a solution to that, except if it's helpful to really separate your hobbies from your career, if that makes sense. Until you're ready to really, you feel like you have all the skills to really promote and put your art there in order to bring money. Don't do it immediately, because you're going to burden your art with that expectation that this has to financially support me. Be in a place where you can just create and not have that burden. And again, that's a privilege, but if it's possible, do that until you feel ready that you can. So I don't want to, anyway, I
think that's wonderful. I was going to add as well, because a realization I've had recently is if you don't have the facility, the resource, and the skill, there's one thing you can do, which I've only learned of recently.
Collaborate?
And the only, basically to delegate, to delegate.
Yeah.
And there's one downside with delegation I found, which is definitely the I do want to be able to be an everything person, right? But sometimes you do have to admit to yourself, like, maybe I want to do everything, but maybe I'm just good at this and this. But there are other people that aren't good at this and this, but they're good at this and that, right? So maybe I can collaborate with them. I can delegate in that way, and actually, like, you can make great friendships and build community and excitement.
That's a great solution,
Keli. Yeah, but it's painful actually to admit to yourself, like,
that's the hard part. It's hard.
I have to let someone else do this,
Wow. But it kind of sparked this just vision of, like, if we did have a creative community where you felt like you can really lean on people and people can kind of complete each other's skill sets in that way, how awesome would that be? And maybe it's because as artists, either we want to do it all ourselves because our vision is so, like, kind of rigid, it has to be my way. Maybe it's that, or maybe because we're more isolated, we don't really have that natural creative community. I mean, you can only do so much online. So those could be reasons that we're not kind of intersecting in those ways and helping each other out more, which would be wonderful if we could.
It just struck my memory recently, the celebration of Gaur Purnima, right? And the story of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, which is this massive 9-volume, but a massive book. And when they were printing it, they wanted to have art in every single one of the books. So you had artists that were working, and they wanted to print all of these books in 3 months. So you have stories of these artists that are painting, and then they're painting for 6 hours and then they pass out because they're so tired. And then another artist just comes in and paints the rest.
Wow.
Right. Where,
amazing example.
And it's going to look different. It's not going to always look like someone's literally completing your work, but that mood of, and I think it goes back to kind of this idea of prolific. Let me just show up and do something. Right. And let me recognize that I'm a conduit primarily for the creative energy that's flowing around me all the time. And I feel like if the more in touch I can be with that, the more in touch I can be with the creative, being a creative conduit, the more I can embrace the fact that, others, I can be supported by others in doing that.
Wow. I love that. And that's the perfect way to encapsulate it all. Because when you're really prolific, you're not really so attached to your vision and the way it goes. I think there's more space for kind of collaboration and bringing people into the process. And it kind of makes me feel like I'm definitely not there, but that's somewhere I would like to aspire towards, where you're kind of just showing up in this mood of, like, again, more of a service mentality, because your intention is something bigger than yourself. And if that's the case, then it doesn't matter inviting others and putting it together, because you're moving towards that service vision, which is really nice.
That's awesome. Yeah, when it's like when there's an aspect of duty to what you're doing, there's not the guilt attached to it.
That's actually really nice.
quantity. It's kind of just like it's my duty to be an
Wow.
artist, whatever, you know.
Yeah, very true.
So Rukmini, what's going on with you then? What can people can go and check out your Instagram, they can buy your cards, you have a book.
Yeah.
How can people connect with you? And
sure.
Yeah, please share.
You can just go to my website. It's Dear Rooksy. That's kind of my brand name, dearrooksy.com. And I have a book, I have cards, I have prints on sale, even art workshops. If anyone wants to join me this Sunday, and I think next weekend as well. That's another thing I started doing, online teaching, which has been really fulfilling. So you could definitely connect with me there.
I had the great privilege of attending one.
Actually. Oh, whatever.
No, honestly, it was incredible. My sister's an artist, and I got to draw my emotions. It was so profound, actually, because it was at the very end of 2020. It was like,
yeah, was it the timeline workshop?
Yeah, the timeline workshop. And honestly, like, maybe I haven't told you, but that was like transformative for me. Like,
wow.
I mean, 2020 transformed everyone, but being able to sit down at the end of that year and just digest and just look at, like, you know, what hedge have I just been pulled through backwards, you know?
Yeah, so true.
And that was so good. So I would personally highly recommend attending workshops as well, because that definitely transformed me, and it shows the power of art as well. Definitely.
You know, I have a confession to make. I've always thought, and it's a different topic, but I've always thought your website was Dear Ruski.
I know, everyone thinks that.
Rockin' Ruski. And I was like, I didn't know Rukmini was Russian, but maybe she is.
Maybe. I'm just a very tan Russian. Yeah, I know what to do. It's 90% of the time people are like, Dear Ruski, and I'm like, I don't know how much I can keep correcting you, but okay. But yeah, people can find me there on Instagram. I'm currently doing a little like mini Enneagram series, which has been very wonderful. I've gone way too much absorbed into it, as I usually do with the Enneagram, but that's kind of what I'm drawing right now, if anyone wants to check that out.
That's awesome. I highly recommend, like, anything that, as a listener, anything that might be new to you, any words or any concepts or anything, go and check them out, because I definitely feel inspired to dive a little deeper. And very grateful for you as well, for just being this person that is introducing these things, you know, not only into the world, but also into like our Bhakti community, you know. That's super cool. And I was going to say, just before you finish as well, like, on this topic of delegating an art community, I hope Take Note, and I think Boudica in general as a platform, I hope it does evolve into a place where people can lean on one another and kind of seek solace, or just like collaborate or whatever it is. And I think there is a thirst, probably a global, if not a universal thirst, for Bhakti artists to connect in a way that they feel like nourished and supported, and these kind of things. So
I love that. I think you guys are totally doing it. I'm super happy with what Boudica is creating, because it's like, it's fulfilling. It's providing something that people are looking for, which is like genuine connection, creative collaboration. So thank you guys. Thanks for doing this. Thanks for having me on board.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming.
No, thank you both.
Yeah, and I just, anyone that is listening, thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you so much for your engagement and writing and questions and reflections. I mean, so many reflections.
I'm just seeing them now.
Yeah, it's very wonderful.
Has so many wonderful comments. Thank you. Thank you, Robert.
We are on social media. You can find us Take Note Podcast on Instagram, as well as if you have any questions or reflections or anything you'd really want to get in touch with us about, you can email us at heytakenote@gmail.com. heytakenote@gmail.com, and we'd love to hear from you and your reflections from the talks. We have a lot of really wonderful guests.
We have some guests coming up, don't we? We have,
talking about just that kind of universal thirst for connection, really wanting to broaden our ability to network and connect with artists and creatives, really around this universal principle of spiritual creativity. And what does that really mean, and how we can all benefit from that, of kind of introducing a little bit more creativity into our life, and specifically into our approach to spiritual life. So we're very excited for all that's to come. So please do stay in touch. You can follow us on social media. And like I said, email us. Thank you again, Rukmini. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you both. Thanks to everyone in the comments. I'm just seeing them now. So lovely. Thanks guys for tuning in.
So
awesome. Let's do this again sometime.
Yes, please. I'm down for that.
Okay.
Thank you all.
All right.
Okay. See you guys soon.
See you.